Welcome back. The Government Accountability Office projects that the nation's debt will hit its highest point in history in 2028. After that, debt will grow faster than the gross domestic product. GAO reports after the pandemic, the government should prioritize getting the country on a sustainable long-term path. Susan Irving is Senior Advisor to the Comptroller General on Debt and Fiscal Issues at GAO. Susan, thanks very much for coming on. You and your colleagues working on this issue for a long time. What's the takeaway, do you think, for agencies from the newest piece of work that you've put out?
Well, I think the takeaway in general for the public is that after the pandemic, that is, after we have sort of managed to control the COVID pandemic and the economy begins to recover so that we're not worried about crunching it back, that everybody has to look ahead and realize that we're on a path that we cannot stay on. So for the agencies, it means, thinking hard about how programs work and about trade-offs within them. For OMB and the president, of course, it's trade-offs between various categories of spending and revenues. And for the American people, it's thinking hard about sort of not do you want big government or small government, but what do you want and what are you willing to pay for?
This work includes a section that begins, absent changes, continued spending revenue at unsustainable levels will pose serious challenges to the future. There are two main bullets under that: consequences of rising debt, uncertainty about the debt limit. Are those the two major things that you believe need to be changed in order to get off that path?
Well, the debt limit is one particular problem, which is that it sounds like it's a fiscal rule, right? Debt limit. It sounds like it limits debt, but it doesn't. The debt limit was actually enacted to make it easier for Treasury to borrow to finance decisions. What creates debt is the gap between spending and revenues. But when we get close to the debt limit, if Congress fails to act, then you're talking about whether the U.S. government will default. And right now, U.S. Treasuries are considered the safest, most secure. People use them like cash. So that's part of what has to change. But the other thing is that we just have to change the path. We can't, by definition, if debt is growing faster than the economy that supports it, it's not sustainable. And we would not want to face the next crisis or the next major natural disaster, another pandemic, anything like that, with this size of a gap between spending and revenues. We want the room to respond. You
write about the effects of compounding interest. That's not as much of a concern today because money's cheap. Interest rates are low all around the world. But there's a lot of expectation in the business community that that's not going to last. Is that maybe the biggest danger about all of the things that you write about, is that we won't be able to refinance or continue to pay low interest rates on the money that we've borrowed?
I'm not worried about refinancing. I'm worried about refinancing at a reasonable cost. Because Treasury securities are so safe, there is a flight to quality. But it is true that when you're running this large a debt, a little tiny change in interest rates, either helps you a lot if they go down or hurts you a lot if it goes up. And interest is one of the fastest growing parts of the spending. I mean, it's true that debt as a share of the economy, the interest payments are no higher than they were when debt was lower. But even at very low interest rates, that's a lot of money and it's growing fast. And it's money you can't use for defense, for domestic priorities, or for tax cuts. We pay interest first.
Another section of this report references executive agencies and Congress and opportunities for those organizations. One of them you write about is addressing improper payments. Is that getting better or is that getting worse? A lot of attention paid to it in the Bush administration, in the Obama administration, in the Trump administration, and now the Biden administration. Are we seeing progress? And you're just mentioning it because it continues to be an issue? Or is it maybe staying neutral or getting worse?
I think we're seeing progress across some areas. We still have problems with the reporting. And really, as my colleagues who spend much of their time on this issue could tell you, it's much easier or better to set up systems that can stop the improper payment rather than trying to recoup it. So I wouldn't say it was getting worse, but it's not getting better fast enough.
Is there a rate at which it's reasonable to expect improper payments to kind of be, for lack of a better term, in check? I mean, it strikes me that 0 is not a reasonable number to aim for when the government's pushing out as much as it's pushing out, not even before the pandemic. But now that we're pushing out so much more, is there a number? Maybe it's never politically possible to say it's okay to have this many improper payments.
Well, it is true that the concept of materiality is sort of awkward in this sense. I actually don't know enough detail about improper payments to know that. I know that you're right. I think 0 is an unreasonable goal, or it can be a goal, but you're not going to get there. There's going to be a mistake. And there are going to be some improper payments where the money is going to be owed, but the person didn't document it right. But what you want to stop is things like, in cases like where much of the EITC improper payments are from paid tax preparers. Well, GAO has suggested regulating those paid tax preparers. Or because the instructions are very, very complicated for the low-income people for whom it's aimed. And other areas where there is confusion and some where there is fraud. And I think it still needs to go down, and I couldn't give you a number, I'm sorry.
We have less than a minute left, Susan, and your colleague, Comptroller General Dodaro, was on the program a couple of weeks ago talking about the high-risk list. You closed this work by writing about the high-risk list and the potential that exists there. 30 seconds left. What's the greatest potential on the high-risk list to contribute to greater fiscal health?
I don't know that GAO has a position on that. I think, for me, the fiscal risks associated with climate change and therefore planning for resilience so that the disasters cost less or maybe are less destructive. In terms of the long-term fiscal outlook, that's a huge one.
Susan Irving, thank you very much. It's wonderful to have you on the program.
Thank you for having us.